So, this is more, how can I put this? You ever have a notion in your head and sort of thinking about it doesn't really do much for you? You kind of have to say it out loud to make it more concrete. It's kind of how my brain works. It's a whole bunch of random amorphous thoughts and notions and everything. And then if I actually stop and um, think about it out loud, it kind of solidifies what I'm trying to say to myself. Makes it more coherent, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it makes sense to me. So why am I doing this? Well, the thought I had in my head was, I am very, very, very frustrated right now, creatively. And I don't mean specifically what's going on with my main channel. I just mean in general. Usually I have something that I'm latched onto, that I'm excited by, that I'm inspired by. Sometimes it's a particular genre, let's say, like I'm really into cyberpunk, or I'm really into vampires or something. Or it's a specific IP, or it's a video game, or it's something where my imagination can ride a little roughshod, something I can get into, something I can sort of live in, lose myself in when I'm not doing work or other things. But for the last several months, nothing. And I've tried really hard to find something. I've thrown myself into some old favorites like, H.P. Lovecraft, some true crime stuff, sword and sorcery a little bit of Conan, that kind of thing, But nothing's really latched on. And so I don't have an outlet, for something that's creative. I mean, the videos I do on my main channel, they're, how do I want to put it? They're of a critical thinking nature. There's a certain amount of creativity that goes on in the editing process, I suppose, when I'm making a video rather than just doing a live stream. There's a certain amount of creativity that's required of me to do the thumbnails and the art for the Lords of the Night streams, which, nobody's making me do that. I just feel like I need something to jazz up my streams versus the other two guys who, they're fine and everything, but they just kind of turn on the stream and go. I put the effort into a thumbnail. But I don't have an outlet. And so I'm trying to think of what could I do that would allow me to have a creative outlet, perhaps use YouTube as a vehicle for it. And so this is what I'm thinking. For those of you who may know about my main channel, and then for those of you that know about Lords of the Night, and then for those of you that have been around long enough to have watched Lords of the Night over the last several years, you will know at one time I took ad requests. And what were these ad requests? Well, people would say, hey, here's $5, here's $10. Write for me an ad about J random product or fake product, fictional product, or write me an ad, a movie preview or a movie trailer type thing for a movie about, time traveling trash cans or something. And I would take these requests and I'd take them back into my little imagination and I'd come up with, a paragraph or sometimes two to tell that story. I'd fill in the blanks. I'd come up with something. And I was really good at it. And that's what I've always been really good at, is just like brainstorming ideas about stories, about contingencies, about how do you get from point A to point B in an idea or a character or a story or something. But I always need an outside source. I always need some kind of external oomph to get my imagination rolling. That's why I so often latch on to like established IPs like Star Wars or Fallout or Aliens versus Predator or Vampire the Masquerade or something, right? You have an established sort of setting or set of circumstances or characters, and then my imagination feeds off of that. I've always had a very hard time self-generating things, whether I'm writing or whatever else. But then, like I say, if somebody throws me, hey, can you write me a movie ad about a coffee cup that transforms into a mobster. I'm looking around my room, and just random things that I see. I could come up with an idea for that. I would find a way to make that work. It would be ridiculous, but I'd find a way to do it. But I need that seed of an idea, or that just random words to make it happen. And so my imagination, my sense of creativity, my sense of creation is just starving for something. And I've tried writing recently. Those of you who've watched the show, Lords of the Night, you might have heard that I've been working on writing something, and I have. But of course, the writing itself is springboarded off of something else. I was reading some Solomon Kane. If you don't know who Solomon Kane is, the character from Robert E. Howard back in the 30s and 20s. The same guy who created Conan the Barbarian. And I wasn't writing a Solomon Kane story, but I was using the character and kind of the setting and that kind of stuff to create a story. I've got like 6 or 7 pages out of it so far, which for me, that's quite a bit. But even then, I felt like this has nothing to do with me, right? I'm leeching off of something else. It's not original. That's one of the things that's always been a roadblock for me in creating or writing anything, is that I always feel like it's already been done. You're just riffing off of something that already exists. This isn't original, blah. It's one of those self-defeatist attitudes, and I get it. It's not healthy. It's not necessarily true, but it is what it is. So anyway, this is my roundabout way of saying maybe I try doing something like a brainstorm stream. And I'm not necessarily talking about my main channel, because it has nothing to do with my main channel stuff, because my main channel stuff is all, social justice or critical analysis of things, or just deconstructing stuff or something. Maybe on here, maybe something separate. I don't know. But there was a Midnight in Exile has a series called The Pitch. And I was invited on there one time. And the idea of that stream is that they sort of randomly take input from the audience and then try to come up with a spec script, or at least a story concept for a movie or a TV show or something. And when I was on there, and this isn't me tooting my own horn, but this is just what happened. When I was on there, a couple of people said 2 or 3 things, and then I just went off. This isn't a criticism of the guys who hosted the show at all. It was just how it happened. This is how my brain works. I just went off and I basically came up with an entire Netflix series, sci-fi / horror thing, right? Just in the 2 hours we were sitting there, or the hour and a half or whatever. And at the end of it, I felt really good. It was like one of those really sort of cathartic exercises. And that's the stuff that I love to do. The problem is that, again, something from the outside needs to come in and poke my brain until I do it. So I don't know. I don't even know if it's a concept that would work. But I do a stream, and I take 3 or 4 ideas from the audience, the first 3 or 4 that come up, and I try to come up with a story. And I tell a story. And and here's the thing, one of the things that I always admired about H.P. Lovecraft, and I know, he's an old racist or whatever. Well, yeah, he was a racist, and so was everybody else back then. But one of the things that always fascinated me about him was he was doing open source storytelling before open source was even a concept. Because he would write his stories, they'd be published in like Weird Tales and things, and then other writers, he encouraged them to take pieces of his universe and use them in their own stories. There's a lot in Robert E. Howard that harkens back to the Cthulhu mythos, because those two were, basically pen pals. Same thing for Robert Bloch. Same thing for, oh God, I'm suddenly forgetting all the names. Anyway, but he had a writer's circle where it's just like H.P. Lovecraft writes a story, and then, Clark Ashton Smith has a story out there somewhere, and they all sort of share. And they created a shared universe after a fashion before you really had shared universes. And so I was sitting here this afternoon thinking, well, if I did something like that, just had like open source story ideas, like just have a stream, I come up with some crazy stuff, and if somebody listens to it and they hear it and they get inspired by it to do something else, hey, have at it. I mean, I'm no, trained screenwriter or anything. I don't even know if it'd be worthwhile for anybody. But then again, I'm not really doing it so much for anybody else than I'm doing it for me, because I need that outlet. My brain needs it. I used to have a role-playing group where, like, every week I'd be playing vampires or going and doing tabletop and doing Star Wars or Dungeons and Dragons or any number of other things. And so I'd have that outlet, but circumstances in life have, lined up as they usually do. And that part of my life has kind of withered on the vine the last couple of years. It's been filled up, thankfully, with YouTube and everybody who's here now listening to me, ramble on. And now I'm looking at the comments. Hello, Shrouded Angel. Hello, Gayest Person on YouTube. I thought something similar a few years ago and found amateur home chemistry to be a surprisingly good outlet. Okay. What about panic mongering for COVID? Yeah, I could do that. Twisted Skipster, feeling better. Pneumonia almost clear. Holy cow. Well, I'm glad pneumonia is almost clear. Pneumonia is no good. I believe I had walking pneumonia a couple of years ago. That wasn't fun at all. I mean, I thought I was dying practically. Anyway, so what I was thinking of was like something on here, or maybe the J Random stream on my main channel, where I just take a couple of notions from people and just belt out whatever comes to mind. Story idea. Just create something, world build off of something. I don't know. Because I need an outlet. I'm going kind of mentally stir crazy. And God knows if the shutdown for coronavirus takes place nationwide, as people are talking about, I'm going to have a lot of alone time on my hands, more so than usual. I don't know if this would be useful to anybody else, but I know it's maybe be useful to me. So here I am kind of talking about this idea out loud. Twisted Scripture says, there are really no new ideas anymore. Even newer books and movies are built off of old ideas. Even the classics like Lovecraft or Tolkien built off making old into new variations. I understand that. I do. And I'm not, dismissing your comment at all. I mean, just inherently, I know that. But at the same time, trying to come up with something that isn't, to me at least, not simply a carbon copy of something that's already been there before. And yes, at this point, all the stories have been told. The hero's journey. The structure is very well known. Or the rebel and the king and the stranger, right? That's what most. That's what a lot of stories come into. You've got the rebel, you got the king, and you got the stranger. So, like in Skyrim, right? You come in, you're the stranger. The Dragonborn, you're the unknown factor, and there's two sides at conflict with one another. You have the king, which is, the Empire, and you have the rebel, which is the Stormcloaks. And, that one sort of set of quests becomes that classic story. And you can take so many different things. You've got the outsider, you've got the cop, and the gang lord, right? So you got J Random Joe Schmo who gets involved in things between the police and crime and finds himself stuck in the middle between the two. And then take that structure and put it onto any number of other endless ad infinitum sort of scenarios, and there you go. I know there's nothing new, but I'm still like, I want to find a twist to it or something that's just me. And like I say, it's my own sense of self-defeat or something, where I just kind of say, nothing I can come up with is going to beat what's already been done. It's I know, like I say, self-defeating, but that's beside the point. So I'm thinking about trying to find something to do to relieve this pressure, because it's like pressure. It's like mental cabin fever. It's like mental claustrophobia. I need to feed my imagination. I need to create something. I need to feel like I'm building something, even if it's ethereal, even if it's not even real. So, what am I trying to say? I don't know. But I'd like to turn it into some kind of project if I can. Bring somebody on and just sort of riff off of stuff for a while and create a story. Now, ideally, it'd be like a podcast. right? An actual thing where I sit down with somebody, record, and throw back a few ideas, and then take the audio and edit it down to something, presentable. Because there's going to be a lot of nonsense in there, I'm sure. A lot of dithering and that kind of thing. Maybe. I don't know. But, rather than stream on my main channel where this wouldn't make any sense, I come over here to the far fringes of my own tiny little corner of YouTube for those of you that are actually subscribed to this channel, and I appreciate you for subscribing to this channel, even though I don't do much with it, and most of it has to do with BDSM and domination submission discussions and topics and things. Yeah, I don't know. But I thought I'd experiment because I thought maybe a couple of people might attend. So tell you what, if you're listening right now, and I assume a couple of you are, throw me random things, a genre, a time period, something. I don't know, just one at a time, just one chat message, something. Give my brain a little bit of exercise, and I know it's a lot to ask. I mean, this is all, I'm feeling very self-centered right now. It's like, oh, please help me. I need help kind of thing. But, just kind of how it is. Gayest person on YouTube. According to Hollywood, a simple twist is all you need. If you think your character is too much like another one, just change the gender. Okay, you know what? I'll do something else in addition. How about this? Let me do this. I'm gonna read you guys what I've written so far of my story. Okay. So this is riffing off of the setting/themes of Solomon Kane. So if you're at all familiar with that story or that character, some of this might sound familiar or reminiscent or something. So, and also you can tell me how I'm doing. So here we go. And I've broken these down into pseudo chapters, even though they're relatively short. It's more like a novella than anything else. Chapter 1, The Road to Dolbarrow. Fingers of midnight clouds clutched at the moon as Josiah Rhodes stumbled his way back towards his home near Dolbarrow. The night's debaucheries at the The night's debaucheries at the disreputable Chatham House had saturated both his mind and gait, an anesthetic achievement that had become a nightly staple, good for such a tortured conscience. The pathway upon which he trotted was likewise besotted after a recent rain, and Rhodes's feet squelched erratically along the quagmire. Though his frame still held the shape of a military cadence, his fighting balance had long since surrendered. Just a mite further on, just a mite further on, he mumbled, a piteous mantra of encouragement against the languidness and slumber of his inebriated instincts. Somewhere beyond the haze of ale, a more conscientious soul bade remind him of obligations on the approaching morrow, but these pleas were quickly dismissed in favor of focused footing. Passing a thicket of the native oak, the moon was suddenly obscured, the pathway sent into pitch. Rote memory, more than sight, guided Rhodes into the darkness. But whatever clouds likewise modeled his mind were instantly frozen along with his progress as the night was pierced by a shout and the most inhuman of screams, and then the clashing of steel upon itself. Rhodes's gaze snapped towards the sound and into a nearby field, a clearing where the moonlight fell in full, illuminating two figures clashing blades in a fight to the death. With the sort of reckless curiosity that only terror can fuel, Rhodes numbly stepped towards the scene in wonderment. The two combatants appeared thuswise: a stout and stocky man in fine clothing, trimmed in some material that caught the moonlight such that it shimmered like gossamer, who wielded a cutlass and, by his staggering, had already received more than one grievous wound. The other figure stood tall and sure, dressed in the garb of a Puritan, and whose face the moonlight revealed as gaunt and somber. But even in shaded light, Rhodes could see a determination in the Puritan's face that transcended any fear of death from this struggle. Drawing his rapier back, its blade already dripping with the blood of his foe, the Puritan dealt the killing strike, cleaving the gossamer man's heart in twain and sending a corpse to the ground where once staggered a man. There was a silence then, a stillness that seemed to sweep across the field and into Rhodes's very soul. A stillness that was just as quickly shattered by that same monstrous cry Rhodes had heard but moments before, but now from just behind him. Ice water sped down Rhodes's spine as he wheeled around to see the most unnameable horror shambling towards him. It carried the shape of a man, but whose face was that of mottled wax, limbs like oily vines flecked with claws, and a fang-ridden maw that split once more into a sanity-shredding scream. Rhodes fell to his knees, his eyes as wide as saucers, but even so they were unable to accept the totality of the horror that was about to be his last living vision. "Nay, foul abomination!" The shout, more a battle cry, stunted Rhodes's finality long enough for him to see the Puritan leap towards the thing, a rapier in one hand, a wheel-lock pistol in the other, and in motion so sure and fluid as to suggest a practiced predator, the blade found its mark through the thing's chest, while the pistol ignited in a flash of flame and thunder, leaving a smoking crater where once the monster's head had been. The thing's body quivered for an eternity of quickened heartbeats before collapsing into a heap of flesh and bone. Satisfied with his work, the Puritan cast his dimly lit brow down at Rhodes. "You are unhurt?" Rhodes nodded in time with the shivers that consumed his body. "Hold fast, then." The gaunt man sheathed his rapier, holstered the wheel-lock, and then withdrew a firm and vicious dagger from his belt. "I must see to it that such deviltry ends this night." And with that, the man stalked back into the field towards the fallen form of the gossamer man. Eyes still affixed to what remained of the monster, Josiah scrambled backwards with surpassing care, lest he rouse the beast somehow. But there was no movement from the husk, which seemed to be deflating ever further into the earth with each passing moment. Unsure what to do, Josiah merely sat there in the dark and the mud. Presently the tall man returned, wiping fresh blood off the dagger's blade with fabric torn from the gossamer man's vestments. "Have you a home? I require shelter and rest." For the first time since the tumult began, Rhodes found words passing his lips. I do, sir. Just a mite down the path here." The tall man nodded, standing firm in an expectation that exuded command. Rhodes just nodded again, scrambled to his feet, and began hurriedly making his way homeward, the tall man pacing him with due purpose just behind. Rhodes's feet acted in kind, all inebriation having fled, along with his certainty of the world. Part 2. The House of Rhodes. Lamplight cast a forest of arching shadows within the front room of the small, modest home of Josiah Rhodes. Without exchanging words since arriving, Rhodes went about tending to a fire and preparing food and drink, while the Puritan perched upon a stool, divesting himself of his armaments and cloak. As Rhodes cautiously approached with a small plate of meat and a cup of bitter tea, the Puritan haltingly began to shed his doublet, and as he did so, Rhodes spied the stain of blood on the man's undershirt. "You're wounded," Rhodes said matter-of-factly, as he set the meal down on the small table beside the Puritan. "I will tend to it." The Puritan's eyes narrowed in a question, but he did not voice it, instead taking Rhodes's assured promise at face value and stripping his torso bare. Rhodes returned presently with a needle, thread, strips of cloth, and a small wine bottle, and was unsurprised to see that the stranger's chest was a veritable landscape of battle scars and other damage of whose origins one might dare not imagine. But this latest atrocity had not gone too deeply, and Rhodes proceeded to clean, mend, and bandage the wound with the practiced care of knowledgeable repetition. For his part, the Puritan remained still, and uttered not a sound as Rhodes did his work, save a question. "You've a name?" "Aye, Rhodes, sir. Josiah Rhodes." The Puritan did not bother with an introduction in kind, instead remaining as still as an oak. Once done and satisfied, Rhodes settled back into a chair opposite the man as the Puritan examined his handiwork. "You know well of wounds, then?" Rhodes nodded grimly. Too well, I'd wager, sir. A long silence commenced then, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the Puritan sipping of tea and chewing of meat. When the meal had finished, Rhodes moved to speak, but was cut short by his guest's preemption. It were a necromancer, he intoned with authority, one who I have tracked for some leagues, and for this and his past diabolics he now has damnation to warm him for all time. The beast you saw was only the most recent aberration created by his magics. Rhodes had only a confounded countenance to offer in response. The Puritan's eyes focused towards an unseen distance in times past and old horrors beheld. Few either know of nor can contain in their minds such evils. The word stirred something in Rhodes, and he looked without forethought at the space just above the hearth. I've known several an evil in my time, sir. The Puritan took the man's angle, spying the sword and the scabbard of an officer hung there, its battle-worn blade glinting firelight. Mayhaps you have. The Puritan turned back to Rhodes, assessing the man with his dark, impenetrable eyes. Mayhaps they've the better of you, for you carry the stench of an alehouse and the form of one given to gluttony. Rhodes was dumbfounded by the insult, but then angry indignation surged forth into his voice. You dare, sir? In my own home? I'll sing your praises to my grave for the slaying that beast and that master, but you've no right to... The Puritan leaned forward into the man's sentence. A man of war and of healing, who cowers in the face of evil and drowns himself in swill. A man who hangs a blade in eyesight to remind how far from honor he descends day by day. In a world where the devil's corruption seeps into the very marrow of the lands he once bled for, now does he dwell at the bottom of a bottle? The Puritan sneered in unveiled disgust. As the Lord's righteous hammer, I do have the right to voice with precision the sight before me. But inasmuch as I am his weapon, so I might be his messenger. And in that correspondence, as he has seen fit to put me before you on this of nights of all nights, will you cower now, seeing what you have seen, knowing what you do now know, or will you slough off your self-sustained woe and raise that blade once more in courage against the darkness? Rhodes stared at the Puritan as one might stare into an unfathomable abyss, the words of the righteous man reverberating through him like a frozen wind. Perhaps he had thought to dismiss the night's events as ale-induced fancy upon the Puritan's departure, but it was made plain now, and it were not an abyss in which he stared, but a crossroads. With uncertain eyes, he looked again at his sword, and then to the small bottle of wine, and then finally to the Puritan. And Rhodes made his choice. Okay. There's more. I'm going to stop there for a second and take a break to at least take a drink, because, talking too long tends to parch me. I don't know. For those of you, how many people are actually still here? It says 8 people. I don't know if 8 people are still here, but if 8 people are still here, even though I stumbled here and there because reading live isn't quite my forte. What do you think? That makes sense? Was it legible audibly? I don't know. Let's see. Johnny Hellcat says, it's actually noon here, but I just woke up. Twisted Skipster says, maybe mix D&D and vampires, a drow damphile. Yeah. And hello, Johnny Hellcat. Hello, Stargazer. Hello, Twisted Skipster. Who else did I miss? I know I missed somebody. Gayest person on YouTube. Dinah Metella. Hello. Stargazer says that's going to be a damn fine book. Dinah Metella. I took some antihistamines, so I'm basically asleep. I'm just listening to the melody of your voice. Oh, well. Johnny, let's see. Shroud Angela says, that sounds good. Johnny Hellcat, what are you reading? Johnny, this is something that I've written. This is a story I'm sort of working on. Maybe a gay sex scene, says Gayest Person on YouTube. Yeah, probably not. I'm keeping the racy stuff out. But, well, I've started this far. Might as well keep going. Where are we next? Chapter 3, The Grim Harvest. They set out as the dawn's rays had only just crested the horizon. Rhodes still in a state of uncertainty, but now fueled by the revelations of the night's horrors that to do nothing in the wake of it was a far grander sin. The Puritan's words had affected him so, and now he followed the man as they began their trek the short miles to Dolbarrow, the long-forgotten weight of his sheathed sword tugging at his waist. "The necromancer did not arrive here by chance," the Puritan relayed. "When I caught my first whiff of him, he was sending agents to plunder the catacombs of Paris for the raw materials necessary for his heresy. In dispatching those agents, he was thus alerted to my pursuit and fled." "And so," Rhodes began cautiously, still trying to find his footing of reference. Excuse me. "He came here of all places for more materials?" "Aye, as evidenced by his most recent beast. But moreover, I believe he had allies here from which to seek succor." Rhodes nearly blanched. "Here? In Dolbarrow? Sir, I do beg your pardon, but I've lived here my whole life, and know every family therein. Surely if there were a kind of witch or warlock here, I could name ye a suspect, but there be none." The Puritan swung around to face Rhodes, his eyes narrowed to saber points. "The devil's minions come to thee garbed in smiles and pleasantries. Such corruptions run low and deep. And this place—" The Puritan looked about the tall and studied oaks, the wide and wild fields all bathed in the warming glow of sunrise. "This place is ancient and untouched by the chiseled edges of modernity, and thus so too are its secrets." He glanced back at Rhodes. "Mark me, one or more of your cherished neighbors are not what they appear." The Puritan returned to his determined marching, and only after the barest pause of doubt did Rhodes make an effort to rejoin him. "And so, where would we start looking for such persons?" The Puritan snorted in sardonic humor. "We go to where one might find the constituent parts of such diabolism. Your hamlet possesses a cemetery, I presume." The pathway eventually crested to an overlook, which presented to the passerby two possible visions. On the gray and grim days, the dark thatch of the small and hutched hovels would blend into the darkness of the earth and trees, painting a foreboding and unwelcome expanse. But on the rare, bright, and clear days such as this, the rolling green of the hills gave way to the warmth of straw-colored roofs and the gentle curls of smoke rising from each as villagers broke fast. And which of either is the mask over the truth? Rhodes was now forced to ponder this question, as his grim companion, certainly not quelled in his fervent pursuit by the pleasant vista, stalked ever onward and down into the valley. Sprinting to keep a pace, Rhodes sought pause. "The cemetery is just past the rise over there, sir." Rhodes pointed towards a small gully that sat just beyond the edge of the village, huddled beneath a ring of strong and native oak, and cordoned by a low fence. Even from their distance, the distinctive shapes of markers and crosses could be surmised. The Puritan nodded and altered his course off the main path and towards the object of his dark curiosity. Tree branches cast scattered shadows over a solemn garden, and the transition from dawn's light to the dim calm of the grave required a moment's adjustment of vision. But even one not as steeped in the horrors of evil as the Puritan was, could plainly see that some soul, long interred in the earth, had been recently disturbed. The Puritan knelt beside the roughly strewn hole in the earth, and it were only then that Rhodes understood the soil of the grave had not been removed from above, but rather clawed away from below. "Saints above!" Rhodes exclaimed. "What madness is this?" The Puritan responded, flatly, still examining the atrocity. "The site of a dark ritual, a resurrection of a kind, but one most unholy." Peering around the edge of the hole, the Puritan plucked a sprig of something that had not grown there, but had been placed there. "Wolf's bane," he muttered knowingly, and then stooped to the earth itself, breathing in deep an expected, but no less repellent stench. "And soured eggs. I am familiar with such concoctions for rituals such as these, though I am thankfully unaware of their mechanisms." The Puritan pointed to the stone grave marker, then looked to Rhodes. "Is this name of significance?" Rhodes moved his eyes away from the harrowing hole in the ground and nodded in sad recognition. "Aye, Nicholas Bullock, buried not 2 days ago. Thrown from his horse, I'd heard of its happening, but were not present for the funeral since I were. Rhodes trailed off, ashamed now of how his sinful vices had so overcome his common humanity. The Puritan said nothing of it, but stood with an iron assurance. Lain but 2 days, and my quarry arrives only yesterday, knowing full well of a fresh death. Let me try that again. Lain but 2 days, and my quarry arrives only yesterday, knowing full well of a fresh death with which he can raise a spawn of hell. Indeed, he had help. Is there kin left of this bullock? Rhodes nodded. I'll take you there. Stumbled over that one. Part 4, and this is where I start getting into the territory that is still sort of revision. I mean, the whole thing's being revised as I go, but as I get nearer to the end of my work so far, it's not as polished and isn't finished. So here we go. Part 4, A Town's Folk. As they made their way the short distance to the village, Rhodes asked the Puritan for a cautious indulgence. When we arrive, please let me be the one to speak to any of my neighbors, at least at first. You'll take their measure, I am sure, but we are all still here fairly unused to strangers, and I would be more likely to convince them to converse on sensitive matters. The Puritan shrugged. As you wish, but if I have a question, I will press it. Rhodes actually smiled in relief, a small victory against the monolith that was the man's presence. And with this preamble, Rhodes deigned to press slightly further. And how might I introduce you then, sir? You shall introduce me with the truth, that I am but a pilgrim. Nothing more than that? The Puritan halted suddenly, so much so that Rhodes stutter-stepped to prevent himself from colliding with the man's back. The Puritan then turned, with a rare expression that was almost like fatherly concern. With sincere eyes and a knowing tone, he opened the door upon the new reality Rhodes found himself in, slightly wider. Names are a powerful tool in the devil's arsenal. To know a name gives you power over a thing, or a person. Thus you would be wise to give your name out sparingly, if at all, when witchcraft is about. And so I am simply a pilgrim, a wanderer in the Lord's service. Rhodes took this in without comment, and they proceeded in silence down into Dolbarrow. A snug collection of 22 distinct buildings comprised of homes, a smithy, and a small inn, Dolbarrow was far and away envisaged from anywhere that true evil might be thought to dwell. Josiah Rhodes had been born here, and what he told the Puritan were true. He knew every family, nook, and cranny of the place. And so it was that the true terror of the new truths he had beheld the night prior finally settled upon him, and he looked upon the place of his birth with trusting eyes, wrought now with newfound suspicions. Proceeding down towards Dolbarrow's center, Rhodes gave polite greetings to those neighbors already active in the early light of dawn, while the Puritan remained ever neutral in countenance, but always assessing each person with world-weary eyes. There were the plump and pleasant Appletons, Simon and Margaret, who, commensurate to their surname, were tending to the apple orchard that ran from the side of their home and into the fields aside the village. The formidably framed Jared Crathorne, whose gruff hammer strikes upon the hot iron created the very rhythm of Dolbarrow's morning activity, and as well the Whittle Harrison, withered and grandmotherly, tending to her front garden of herbs and always happy to give a wave to a familiar face. The rest of the populace was still rising for the day, or otherwise out of sight, and to Rhodes things looked as normal and as welcoming as they had ever been. Yet unavoidable in its collateral effect, the aura of uncertainty radiating from the Puritan numbed all of it. Rhodes nodded to the inn ahead, whose brightly colored sign proudly proclaimed itself the Dole's Angel. There it is, held in the Bullock family for generations. Nicholas's brother Samuel is the keeper. I've not spoken to him in several days, but we are friendly enough. A question then occurred to Rhodes. If I may ask, sir, whatever gave you the inkling to come to this far part of the world, of all places, looking for your man? The Puritan grunted. The last word from the dying lips of his Parisian lackey was Dolbarrow. Only by God's grace did I happen upon him where and when I did, a few moments besides, and I would still be on the hunt for him. Rhodes stopped then, suddenly enough that the Puritan followed suit, and Rhodes felt internally embarrassed that he had not made the realization earlier. And I am but a useful tool for you in this hunt, I who am from Dolbarrow. Without my help, your pursuit would have ended. The Puritan looked at Rhodes with something like pity, shaded with irritation. I use whatever and whomever the Lord puts before me to undertake my work, yes. But you are a convenience, not a necessity. An untested ally, possibly. I have been many a place entirely foreign to me and adapted as needs be without guidance. But if you wish to go back to your hovel and your bottle, the Puritan swept out a guiding hand back in the direction of Rhodes's house, then by all means. Otherwise, mayhaps you harbor care enough for your neighbors to ensure the safety of their lives and the security of their immortal souls. Rhodes sighed, more in self-recrimination than in defeat. No, I do not want that. It is just... Rhodes glanced around the town, the people, the trees, the sky. I feel untethered to all things now, since last night. The Puritan's gaze softened, at least as much as granite might soften for a harsh breeze, and, hesitantly, reached out and placed a hand on Rhodes's shoulder. Such knowledge is a burden willfully borne only by the rare few who deign to seek the darkness on behalf of the light. It is easy to turn away from it, deny it, live in a kind of false ignorance of it. Many have, and many more will do so. But mark me, Josiah Rhodes, if you choose to do so, you will never, never rest easy ever again. Rhodes took a breath, nodded a thanks to the Puritan, and led him into the Dole's Angel. The small pub within had been the village's gathering place for more years than could be recalled, owned by the family Bullock. "Hail, Samuel Bullock!" Rhodes called out with a smile, tainted by apology. The man in question looked up from his labor, tending to the inn's small collection of spirits behind the well-traveled bar. Bullock, a portly man with black hair, with a black head of hair and an impressive mustache, each giving way to the gray of older years, gave a nod to his neighbor while his eyes warily settled on the Puritan, and then to Josiah's side. "I, Josiah, good morrow." Rhodes stepped up to lean cordially against the bar. "And to you, Samuel, my condolences on the loss of Nicholas, and my apologies for having been absent from his ceremony." Bullock's visage remained neutral as he nodded a solemn thanks. Was a grim business, that. The man's pride, as Josiah well knew, would not permit him to say or dwell further on the subject. And accordingly, the innkeeper smoothly changed the subject. "Are you off to war, then?" Bullock motioned to the sheathed sword. Rhodes paused, having all but forgotten it was there, and decided that were he and the Puritan to make progress, he would need to relay the truth, though filtered by falsehood. "Of a kind, I am afraid. I was set upon the night past by a highwayman of some kind, and I was only saved, thanks be to God, by my newfound companion, who happened to be nearby. Sir..." Rhodes glanced back at the Puritan, who was himself now giving Rhodes an expectant look. "Walker." The Puritan's face did not falter, but in his eyes there was, perhaps, the barest passing of a sardonic appreciation. Rhodes re-engaged Bullock. "We've reason to think the brigand was not the only one of his kind about, and that there may still be danger. Thus I was curious to know if you had perhaps seen such a stranger, or strangers with the look of trouble about them in the past day or so?" Bullock opened his mouth to speak when Walker stepped forward, presenting something clutched between his wiry fingers, the scrap of the necromancer's robe, still stained with the sorcerer's blood, wiped from Walker's blade. "The thief of last night wore a garment such as this. Do you recall seeing such on any passerby of late?" Bullock leaned forward, giving the scrap of silk a curious assessment. "Cannot say I have seen such a thing worn by anyone here, but then I've not had a lodger for at least 3 days. All who have visited since that were not neighbors were mostly passing merchants with whom I have some familiarity, stopping in for a drink before leaving on their way to Wessex or northward." And that is where I've written up to. I've taken inspiration in the cadence of the language from both Robert E. Howard, but probably more so H.P. Lovecraft. It's got kind of an antiquated feel to it. I throw a few sort of old phrases or just sort of implied things in there, trying to fit with kind of the theme of it, or I don't know, the era in which it might have been written. Anyway, this has been cathartic. I don't know if I've got anything else to say, so to speak, but I just needed to do something because, like I say, even though we're not quite in a quarantined officialdom yet, it still feels like the world is kind of closed down for the day and possibly longer, obviously. And when I walked to the store this morning, I said it on Twitter, it was like I Am Legend. I mean, it was just blank. The streets were empty. There was no traffic. And even on a Sunday morning, which I've walked to the store countless times on Sunday mornings, there's cars. There's people on their bikes, walking their dogs or something. Nothing. And the church parking lot, just a little bit down the way here, was empty. And on a Sunday morning, I've never seen that in the entire time I've lived here. And it just kind of added to the sense of emptiness, And so maybe that's what inspired me to vent a little bit. But anyway, I think that's all I've got, so to speak. I will look back over any questions or comments you guys have, and then I'll close up for the time being. Let's see. Where did I stop? Oh, yeah, the gay sex scene. Gayest person says, honestly, it's good so far. Johnny Hellcat says, sounds interesting. Twisted Skipper says, that is fucking amazing. Johnny Hellcat reference from Earthsea. I never read Earthsea, so I don't know. Dynamitella, your vocabulary is lovely. You use words I didn't realize I knew. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of various, words stuck up in my musty old attic that just kind of come out when I write like this. StargazeNet says, I'm going to want to read that book. Dynamitella says, that's literally my dream. Let's see. Jordan 250 got here late, but hi, Scribe. Hi, Jordan. Yeah, if you want to rewind, I basically read the entirety of the quote unquote story/book I'm working on, just for, I don't know. Sometimes it helps to read it out loud. You find little parts that need to be fixed. And obviously I stumbled over my own vocabulary in different places because it reads better sometimes than or I should say it mentally reads better than sometimes it does in reciting it. So there you go. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say. Like I say, the purpose of this was, sort of brainstorming to myself about doing some kind of stream series or something where I start brainstorming story ideas or settings or world building or something. I don't know. Usually this is something you would do if you're a game master for a role-playing game, right? You'd be the guy who has the book, and you create a scenario, you use the established characters or elements or whatever else and sort of build a little slice of reality for other people and then play it out. I used to do that. I think I was fairly good at it. I wasn't much of a rules monkey. I didn't do crunch very well. I wasn't big on the math and stuff. I picked it up as needed, but I was always so much more about story and narrative and character development and things like that. I loved helping people create characters for the games that I either played in or ran myself, just brainstorming something. I remember, like, each time I helped somebody create a character, I remember it so distinctly because it was such a organic, symbiotic experience. They'd say, oh, I'm thinking about something like this or something like that, but I don't know how it's going to work. And it would just, and just immediately that sort of empty space of trying to fill in the gaps of a story or somebody's idea, and my brain would just work overtime, and I loved it. It was like my instinctual, I don't know, my instinctual talent, if I have one. That might be it. Anyway, let's see. Johnny Helgett says, when you talk about him not giving his name, I figured it was an Earthsea reference. No, I forget where I mean, I've read that in several places before. Like, I mean, and it's even an element in some role-playing games I've played, where if you know someone or something's true name, that becomes sort of like a veritable voodoo doll you can use against them in spells and things like that. And I'm kind of taking inspiration from, the kind of legends and things that might have existed and probably did exist back in the olden times of the Dark Ages when witchcraft and the devil was about and such. So, and giving names to things was always kind of a biblical deal, and your Christian name, that kind of thing. So, and also the other reason why I didn't want him to give his real name was it allows me to avoid having him say my name is Solomon Kane, because that, even though I haven't read that much Solomon Kane, that is the character I'm riffing off of here. So he could be anybody, but just the image of this character is that character. And so now he doesn't have to say his name, and we can just go along with a pseudonym for the sake of the story. Yeah. Twisted Skipper says, I would love to attend a campaign UDM. Well, I thought about it before, doing it online. A couple of times I tried, kind of were hit and misses. So it's, I mean, given the time zone differences and people's schedules and everything, it's almost even worse than working with adult people that I know who have kids and jobs and things, because, you just can't arrange it that way. And I've never tried to do it, online. So. And let's see. Stargazer says, I hope you keep doing these streams, reading your book to us. I'm interested in it now. And No One Nowhere says, I'd like to see where you take it. Well, I will see what I can do. If the inspiration hits me again, I'll probably pick away at this. And if I get another couple of quote unquote chapters done, maybe I'll do an update to this at some point, more structured. Anyway, guys, thank you for coming out and listening to me babble. I'm just trying to figure some things out for myself, in a non-emergency way in this time of quarantine. I figured that somebody's going to write a book or something called The Plague Year, talking about the ins and outs of the whole coronavirus crisis, or there'll be a documentary or something. That's the title I assume someone will come up with, because I came up with it and I'm a hack. So anyway, I'm going to sign off here. Hope to see you guys at 4:30 p.m. Pacific or 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on my main channel for the great debate between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And for anybody listening to this in the future, I have just dated when this took place, if you're at all curious. So, guys, thank you for joining me briefly. Hope you found it interesting for whatever it was worth. If you have any thoughts for me on my lamentations or anything else, please leave them in the comments below. And I will see you later. Take care.